With the creation of transoceanic empires, with the emergence of transoceanic business, that is global capitalism, with the advent of the scientific revolution, with the heated debates across religious groups and between the early scientists and the religious communities, Europe underwent a period of ever-accelerating change with new forms of government, new forms of warfare, new breakthroughs in technology, new breakthroughs in scientific understanding. So in the fifth age of globalization, the age of transoceanic empire, Europe is extremely dynamic, not peaceful, not necessarily just, because the European rule in the Americas is anything but just. It's often brutal. It invents a global slave trade. There is a tremendous repression of native populations, and there is a tremendous violence and conflict among the European powers themselves. But it's a kind of competition that in fact gives rise to more and more powerful states that are in competition with each other. And when we look to Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries, these are the 2 centuries before the industrial age, we see a nonstop competition among the major imperial powers. No one of these powers is dominant. Britain is clearly ascendant and becoming more powerful with its overseas colonies, but Spain remains powerful. Holland, newly independent from the Spanish Habsburgs, has a strong imperial base in some phase in Brazil, in South America, in my city, New York, which was previously New Amsterdam, before it became part of the British colonies. It was part of the Dutch overseas empire, and of course in Asia with the Dutch Empire of Batavia, today's Java part of Indonesia. There was still, with Spain and Portugal, the worldwide empires. France was a rising land power, a highly populous giant of a nation, able to mobilize a very large army, and also keen, as were its neighbors, on overseas empire. There, of course, was the Holy Roman Empire, and especially the Habsburg imperial realms, both the Spanish Habsburgs and the Austrian Habsburgs, as 2 of the major powers of Europe. The Pope still had major holdings and major power in the papal states of the Italian peninsula. And there were rising powers within the German states, and most notably the early rise of Prussia, which would become the core of the new German state established later in the 19th century. So this was a period of major powers in Europe, none decisive, none decisively winning victories over the other, the balance of power continuing to shift. Britain, an ocean-going power primarily, France, a land-based power, the Habsburgs, both with their vast global holdings through the Spanish side of the Habsburg family, and the Austrian Habsburgs with their large land holdings in Central Europe. And this competition gave rise to the modern European nation states, and of course it gave rise to a world that was divided among European empires, especially during the 19th century. It also gave rise to new ideas, to the scientific revolution, to the age of enlightenment, in which scholars and especially men, but people of letters across Europe corresponded with each other in a republic of letters, which shared ideas that stretched across Europe from western reaches all the way to St. Petersburg in the Russian imperial lands, with major breakthroughs in ideas, in philosophy, in political organization, and in science. This was a period of tremendous competition and tremendous dynamism. What are our goals in this class? Our goals are to understand the rise of what would become the major European nation states, to understand the dynamic of competition among them, military, imperial, scientific, technological, to understand the great events that were formative for Europe as Europe became dominant throughout the world, and notably the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars. And all of this will bring us to the very end of this transoceanic age and to the birth of the sixth age of globalization, the industrial age, because it is towards the end of the 18th century that some of the pivotal technological advances, and most importantly the steam engine, will take us from the age of transoceanic empire to the new industrial world. And it will be in that new industrial world that of all of these competing powers, Britain will turn out to be the dominant power of the 19th century. So we're going to visit the sites of these competing centers of power of Europe, the throbbing, thriving London, where new forms of governance take shape with the British Parliament, to the great architecture of a rising British Empire, to the palaces, Blenheim Palace, where in the late 19th century Winston Churchill would be born, but where in the early 18th century the Duke of Marlborough was awarded the palace for his victories of wars in Europe. We'll visit one of the crucial institutions in building the early modern world and today's world, and that is the Bank of England, the first proper central bank in the world, established in 1694, and what would be a critical instrument of British power, because Britain was able to mobilize so much military and industrial might, in part because it was able to mobilize so much finance. And so it was the monetary and financial system that has been called the sinews of power, the way that Britain was able to mobilize so much might and force to come to dominate the world. And we'll visit the capital of the Habsburg lands, the Hofburg Palace in the center of Vienna, and the great Belvedere Palace given to one of the great princes who was militarily victorious in the battles in Europe at the end of the 17th century. So as we travel through the Habsburg lands, through the British Empire, through Paris and Versailles, the royal seat of the French kings, we'll see the great European empires that were to come to dominate the world, especially in the age of industrialization in the 19th century. And we'll get the idea of that dynamic that gave rise to so much power in Europe that it changed the entire world.